The Galactic Council chamber was a spectacle of power and arrogance, a vast, circular hall lined with hovering platforms, each occupied by delegates of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. At the center of it all, beneath a colossal dome of shifting holographic constellations, sat High Chancellor Zyvaris, the supreme arbiter of interstellar law. His elongated reptilian form reclined in a throne of obsidian, his emerald scales reflecting the dim glow of the chamber's control panels. His golden eyes narrowed as he scanned the assembled representatives, pausing briefly on the smallest and least significant member, the human. The council's discussion had turned once again to Earth. "This is a waste of our time," rumbled General Kaarthok of the Brule Empire, his deep voice carrying across the chamber like the growl of a caged predator. His thick, armored hide and twin tusks marked him as a warrior of a species that had crushed a dozen worlds underfoot. "Humans are weak. Their bodies are fragile. Their weapons outdated their technology," he scoffed, laughable. A ripple of amusement passed through the council. Several species, including the sleek, feline Ketsari, clicked their mandibles in agreement. The Ketsari diplomat, Valeris, leaned forward, her golden fur shimmering under the chamber's artificial lights. "I fail to see the purpose of their continued presence here. They have no empire, no fleets capable of challenging the smallest of our patrol vessels. And yet, they demand a voice among us." A murmur of discontent echoed through the assembly. Humanity's seat at the table had been granted reluctantly, a mere formality after their discovery of faster-than-light travel. But while other species had risen through centuries of war and conquest, humanity had done nothing to earn its place, at least, not in the Council's eyes. High Chancellor Zyvaris raised a clawed hand, silencing the chamber with a single gesture. "The matter is not whether humans deserve a place here, but whether they can survive in the galaxy as it is." He turned his gaze toward the lone figure, standing at the base of the chamber. "And for that, we have arranged a demonstration." Lieutenant Commander Jack Reynolds did not flinch under the weight of 100 alien eyes. He stood tall, his rigid military posture betraying no emotion, though he had already assessed every potential threat in the room. Years of Navy SEAL training had conditioned him to ignore fear, to measure risks, to be ready. Still, he could feel the barely concealed disdain from the council members above. He had seen that look before. He had seen it in the eyes of men who thought their wealth or rank made them untouchable. He had seen it in insurgents who underestimated the enemy, in officers who dismissed guerrilla tactics as inferior. That same arrogance had gotten them killed. Jack exhaled slowly. He wasn't here for speeches. He was here to prove them wrong. A holographic display flickered to life above the council, revealing a planet shrouded in crimson storms. "This," Zyvaris announced, "is Luthor 9, a hostile environment, home to one of our most advanced combat training simulations." The image shifted, revealing a vast battlefield, a ruined cityscape crawling with mechanical adversaries, towering war machines bristling with energy weapons, and terrain that shifted unpredictably. "The rules are simple," the Chancellor continued. "Each species will send a champion to participate in the trial. Victory will be determined by survival, efficiency, and strategic capability." His thin lips curled into something resembling a smirk. "A chance for humanity to prove its worth, if it can." The laughter that followed was subdued, but it was there. The council had already decided the outcome. Jack's expression remained neutral. "Let them laugh." Kaarthok leaned forward, tusks gleaming in the artificial light. "We will see how long your human lasts against true warriors." Jack met the Brule general's gaze and allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "Long enough." The dropship rattled as it descended through the turbulent atmosphere of Luthor 9, its reinforced hull groaning against the planet's howling winds. Jack Reynolds sat strapped into his harness, methodically checking his gear, though he had little to work with. The council had made certain of that. His weapon was an outdated projectile rifle, primitive compared to the plasma-based armaments favored by the other competitors. His armor was a lightweight, standard-issue combat suit, offering little protection against energy weapons. They expected him to fail, to be torn apart in minutes. He understood their game. Good. He had spent a lifetime winning games rigged against him. A distorted voice crackled in his helmet comms. 10 seconds to deployment. Jack rolled his shoulders, forcing his muscles to relax. A deep breath. A slow exhale. The rear hatch hissed open, and the battlefield stretched before him. A shattered metropolis drowned in blood-red mist, the ruins shifting unpredictably as the simulation reconfigured itself in real time. From distant rooftops, massive automated turrets scanned for movement, their barrels humming with latent energy. Somewhere in the fog, the other competitors were already moving. Jack sprinted forward, taking cover behind a collapsed overpass just as the first explosion tore through the sky. The Ketsari combatant had engaged immediately, his plasma blades carving through synthetic enemy drones with fluid, predatory efficiency. Across the battlefield, the Brull warrior waded into the chaos with a towering war axe, his armor deflecting incoming fire as he crushed everything in his path. They fought with confidence, with overwhelming force. Jack fought differently. He moved in silence, slipping between ruined structures, his mind processing the battlefield in layers. The Council had designed the simulation to reward aggression, to favor those who dominated through sheer firepower. But they had underestimated him. A mechanical sentry drifted overhead, its scanning beams sweeping across the rubble. Jack flattened against the scorched remains of a wall, waiting. The instant the beam passed, he moved fast, efficient. His knife slid between the drone's armor plating, severing critical wiring before it could sound an alarm. He didn't need brute strength. He needed precision. The minutes stretched on, and the battlefield grew more chaotic. The Ketsari fell first, his speed failing him, when an aerial strike vaporized his cover. The cybernetic combatant lasted longer, but their reliance on enhanced targeting systems proved their undoing when the simulation's jamming field activated, leaving them blind. Jack adapted. He scavenged what he could, repurposing alien tech into makeshift traps. A disassembled drone became an improvised explosive. A severed turret core turned into an energy disruptor. He struck from the shadows, eliminating threats before they knew he was there. From a distant command station, the Council watched in silence. The laughter had stopped. Zyvara's golden eyes narrowed as he observed the human's progress. Impossible, he murmured. Karthok's jaw clenched. The Brull general had expected to see the human broken, not outlasting his own finest warriors. His grip tightened around the railing as Jack took down another wave of enemies with cold, tactical precision. The battlefield dwindled to two, Jack and the Brull warrior. They found each other in the ruins of a crumbling cathedral, the air thick with the scent of scorched metal and ozone. The Brull loomed over him, his war axe resting against his armored shoulder. "I'll give you this," the warrior growled. "You lasted longer than I thought." Jack said nothing. He was studying him, mapping out every weakness. The Brull swung first, the axe cleaving through stone as Jack evaded, rolling into a crouch. He didn't counter immediately. He waited, measured, let the Brull exhaust his strength with every missed strike. Then, when the moment was right, he moved. A knife flashed, carving through a joint in the warrior's armor. The Brull roared, staggering. Jack followed up, precise and relentless, striking where the armor was weakest, where the nerves were most vulnerable. The axe fell from the warrior's hands as he dropped to his knees. The simulation flickered. The trial was over. Jack straightened, blood staining his blade. He looked up toward the observation deck, where the Council watched in stunned silence. He had survived, and they had made a mistake underestimating him. The chamber was silent. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council had no words. The simulation's final tally flickered in holographic letters above the battlefield. Human Victor, Lieutenant Commander Jack Reynolds. Jack stood amidst the ruins of Luthor 9's artificial war zone, his breath steady despite the exhaustion threatening to drag him down. The synthetic blood of drones and defeated warriors stained the ground around him, yet he remained untouched, his uniform tattered but his body unbroken. He had done more than survive. He had dominated. High above, the council chamber erupted into debate. The Ketsari diplomat Valeris clicked her claws against the railing, her fur bristling with disbelief. "This must be an error," she hissed. "The simulation is flawed." Zyvaris' expression remained unreadable, his golden eyes flicking between the data streams, searching for an anomaly, an inconsistency, anything that could explain the impossible. There was none. The human had outmaneuvered, outlasted, and outthought every competitor. Kearthok's patience snapped. The Bruhl general slammed a fist against the council table, his tusks bared in fury. "This proves nothing. A mere simulation does not determine the strength of a species. Combat does." Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing up at the towering form of the Bruhl warrior he had bested. He had seen this before, pride refusing to accept reality. A wounded predator, too stubborn to recognize when it had already been beaten. Zyvaris raised a clawed hand, silencing the commotion, his gaze fixed on Jack, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his voice. Would the human accept the challenge? Jack exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he took in the council's expectant stares. They weren't satisfied. Not yet. Fine. He could end this the same way he had ended countless fights before, with brutal efficiency. The chamber's floor shifted, panels retracting as a secondary arena emerged. This one was smaller, intimate, designed for one-on-one combat. Its walls hummed with energy barriers, ensuring there would be no outside interference. Kearthok stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Jack. The Bruhl's war axe had been replaced with a more traditional weapon, a curved dueling blade, its edge humming with a faint violet glow. A blade designed to cut through armor and bone alike. Jack glanced down at what they had provided him. A combat knife. Serrated edge, military standard, but laughably small in comparison. He didn't complain. It wasn't the weapon that mattered. It was the man holding it. The energy barriers flared to life. The duel had begun. Kearthok charged like a battering ram, his blade cleaving through the air with lethal precision. Jack sidestepped at the last possible second, feeling the heat of the energy weapon sear the air inches from his face. The Bruhl was strong, impossibly so, his strikes backed by sheer mass and centuries of battlefield experience. But Jack was faster. He weaved through the onslaught, letting Kearthok expend his energy in wild, rage-fueled swings. Every missed strike sent sparks cascading against the arena walls. Jack didn't retaliate immediately. He observed, studied. The Bruhl's footwork was powerful but predictable. His attacks had a slight hesitation at the end of each swing, a fraction of a second where his guard opened. Small details, invisible to anyone who had never fought for their life 100 times over. Jack moved. He stepped inside Kearthok's reach, his knife flashing upward. A shallow cut, precise, along the warrior's dominant forearm. Not deep enough to cripple, but enough to disrupt his grip. Kearthok snarled, retaliating with a sweeping arc meant to cleave Jack in two. Jack ducked low, rolling beneath the strike, then surged forward, slamming his shoulder into the Bruhl's exposed ribs. The impact sent a shock through the warrior's frame, forcing him back a step. Just one step. That was all Jack needed. His blade struck again, this time finding the exposed gap beneath Kearthok's shoulder plate. A burst of crimson followed as the warrior bellowed in pain. The duel should have ended there. Any human opponent would have yielded. But the Bruhl were not human. Kearthok roared, his remaining strength fueling a final, desperate strike. Jack twisted at the last moment, the energy blade grazing his ribs, searing fabric and flesh. Pain flared, hot and immediate, but pain was an old companion. He ignored it. His knife found the Bruhl's throat. For a moment, neither moved. Kearthok's chest heaved, his pulse hammering against the blade's edge. Jack's grip remained steady, his breath slow and controlled. The arena fell silent. Then, at last, Kaarthok dropped his weapon. The energy barriers flickered off. Jack stepped back, his knife lowering. He had won. Again. This time, the silence in the council chamber was absolute. The laughter was gone, replaced by something far heavier. A realization. A warning. Zyvaris studied him with something akin to calculation. Valeris said nothing, her tail flicking in agitation. Kaarthok, despite the sting of his loss, inclined his head in something dangerously close to respect. Jack exhaled, rolling his shoulders once more. He could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken shift in the air. They weren't looking at a primitive species anymore. They were looking at a threat. The council chamber remained deathly still. The weight of what had transpired pressed down on every being present, a suffocating realization, settling in like a storm on the horizon. The laughter, the mockery, the derision. They had all been stripped away, replaced by something far more dangerous. Fear. Jack Reynolds stood at the center of it all, his knife still slick with the blood of a warrior who had been deemed invincible. His ribs ached where the bull's blade had grazed him, but he made no move to acknowledge the pain. Pain was a distraction. He had learned to ignore distractions long ago. High Chancellor Zyvaris leaned forward, fingers steepled as he studied the human with an intensity that could have cut through steel. Fascinating, he murmured at last, his voice carrying the weight of calculation. Across the chamber, Valeris' golden eyes flicked toward the duel's aftermath, her ears flattened in agitation. "This changes nothing," she said sharply, though there was no conviction in her voice. "A single warrior does not make humanity our equal." Kaarthok remained silent. He still knelt where Jack had bested him, his thick fingers pressed to the wound at his shoulder. When he finally rose, there was no anger in his gaze, only recognition. He turned to the council, tusks glinting under the artificial light. "That is where you are wrong." The broad general straightened, his massive form casting a shadow over the nearest delegates. "This human fought with skill," he said, his deep voice measured, "with strategy, with the mind of a predator." His gaze swept across the assembled representatives. "How many of you could have bested me in single combat?" No one answered. Jack remained silent, watching, waiting. He had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful move was to let others speak. Kaarthok exhaled sharply, his wounded arm hanging stiff at his side. "You mocked them. You believed them weak. But in their world, they do not rely on strength alone. They do not depend on thick hides or energy shields to survive." His tusks gleamed as he bared his teeth. "They endure." A murmur rippled through the council, uncertain, hesitant. Zyvaris tapped a claw against the armrest of his throne, his expression unreadable. "Endurance is not dominance. A single warrior's victory does not change the hierarchy of the galaxy." Jack finally spoke. "You still don't get it." The chamber quieted again. He took a step forward, slow and deliberate, letting his words sink into the silence. "You keep talking about dominance, about power. You think strength comes from brute force, from empire building, from the number of warships in your fleet." He glanced at the massive chamber, at the species who had ruled the stars long before humanity had even discovered fire. "But power isn't about any of that." "Not really." He let the words settle before continuing. "You've all had the luxury of sitting up here, looking down at everyone else. You've grown complacent because you've never had to fight for your place. Not the way we have. Humanity doesn't dominate. We don't conquer. But when you push us, when you force our backs against the wall," he met Zyvaris' gaze, unwavering. "We win." Silence. Then the Ketsari diplomat scoffed. "You assume too much, human." Her voice was sharp, but there was something behind it, something not quite as certain as before. A single victory in a controlled environment does not equate to war. Jack smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "You think this was controlled?" He gestured toward the blood-stained arena floor. "You stacked the odds against me. You stripped me of advanced weapons. gave me nothing but scraps, and expected me to fail. He let the challenge hang between them, and I still won. Zyvaris remained motionless, but his tail flicked once against the floor, the only sign of his thoughts. His golden eyes gleamed with something unreadable. Speculation, perhaps even amusement. "Then tell me, human," he said at last, his voice almost too soft. "What is it you want?" Jack's smile faded. His expression turned cold, unreadable. Nothing that, more than anything else, seemed to unsettle them. Jack turned his back on the council, walking toward the chamber's exit without another word. He had nothing left to prove. Humanity's place in the galaxy had already been decided. They had underestimated his kind once. They would not make that mistake again,